everyone. It's Sherry with Pearl at the Mailbox, and we're continuing our series in January because it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month of the amazing women that are on the front lines making a difference in this fight to educate and protect our children and protect our survivors. And I would like to introduce you to Alicia, who is an amazing fighter on the front lines in Florida. So, Alicia, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell the audience what you do and how you got involved, and because I really want everybody to hear from you.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Thanks for having me. And yes, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to just share in the fight against trafficking, especially during a month where we actually have businesses and schools and people sort of rallying around this opportunity to get involved. So, my name is Alicia Tappan. I am the founder and CEO of Survivor Led Solutions. It's a local nonprofit here in Florida as far as boots on the ground, working with survivors and helping empower them into leadership positions, but we're also nationwide where we have a collaborative approach, bringing in survivors from all over the nation to get together to rest, restore, but also, kind of feed off of each other's positions in those fights and say, hey, what's working for you over in California and how can we implement that here in Florida or around the nation?
Right. That's amazing. So, how did you get started?
Well, so my story actually starts as a CSEC victim and not really understanding what that was. My story really is in the schools. My trafficker was a coach at my high school. And once I came forward about what was happening to me, investigation started, law enforcement gets involved. It actually required the whole school district to get involved in this fight. And we actually put him in prison for about 7 years. And while that 7 years was passing, he was getting a law degree, gets out of jail, goes and embezzles $140,000 and finds himself back in prison because
Oh,
the
wow.
judge that he had both times was the same judge that we had together. So when this judge who had seen this girl go through all of this hardship and he begged and pleaded that this was an accident, this was a one-time thing, it was a mistake, and then he goes and does something even more detrimental. And I say that because he's in prison for the rest of his life because of the $140,000 he embezzled. That was more than a person's life, right? In the legal system, that was worth more. And I didn't understand it. Like, now I'm in my 20s and I'm going to college, and I was lucky enough to be able to get out of my hometown and go to college in 1,200 miles away. But I knew something was wrong. Like, I couldn't explain, the trauma was severe. There was a lot of self-deprivation, self-sabotage, and all of that as we go through this victim state. But it didn't sit right with me that he could have a life again and people would trust that, he was telling the truth the first time, even though, I had the scars to prove it.
Right.
So,
Right.
I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't domestic violence. It wasn't just sexual assault. There wasn't really a word for this human trafficking thing because I didn't fit the narrative of a random kid getting kidnapped and taken to a third world
Right.
country, right? I didn't have that like boyfriend that hurt me. It was this person that I knew and trusted who used force, fraud, and coercion to get me into this lifestyle. And he didn't just do it to me, he did it to 33 other girls just like me. So my fight starts 20 years ago, and speaking out not only for myself, but for those girls as well. So Survivor Led Solutions was really birthed out of the narrative that, rescue was the way to go. And I kept saying, like, I didn't need anybody to rescue me. I just needed somebody to hear me, see
Mm-hmm.
me, right? Treat me like a human. Um, so while I spend the majority of my 20s in the escort service world, in the sex world, just selling my body to make a living, to pay rent, to get to the next place. I knew my brain had been rewired, but I could not get somebody who was qualified to help me. And I'd sought counseling several times. And because I was such an ambitious and such a smart person, they didn't believe it really. They were just like, oh, you're fine. You're just stressed out. You're just making bad choices. Like you're just dating the wrong person. And so it wasn't until 2018 where I met a girl of what they called human trafficking survivor. And when I heard her story, and I'm staring at her in the face, and we are walking through a Starbucks drive-through because neither of us have a car with a valid license. Neither of us have a phone that really operates and works, right? We have these tattoos, we have these addictions, and I like fell to the floor. Her story was my story. Different characters, different setting, same plot, right? We both end up in this broken state, and we trusted the person who was supposed to care for us. So I got really loud and I started telling my story to anybody who would listen, right? And there were haters and there were doubters and there were shamers still as I was telling this story. And but I didn't let it stop me. I was a part of the first anti-trafficking um, effort here in Northwest Florida, and we started our task force. We did A21 Walks for Freedom, this international campaign to get the awareness out there. We started the first safe house for teenage girls. Was the executive director for that for 5 years, and then found myself in another position of like crisis when I get in a car accident and find out I'm pregnant for the third time. And I had no idea that my whole life was going to change. And in that moment, it was asking my community where I have, blood, sweat, tears, shared, built, fundraised, networked, trained, all this stuff, and to say, can we still keep moving? And God said no. And it was really wild to me, right? Because
Yeah.
and not to throw the organization under the bus, and actually they have dissolved since then, but I got slapped with a non-compete agreement on my last day of work as the executive director. And it really hit me,
Oh
Sherry,
yeah.
like it hit me that if this is happening to me, it's got to be happening to other survivor leaders who are out there. And even that term survivor leadership can be triggering to some degree because I don't mean it in the sense of like that there are followers of survivors. What I mean it as like leaders need to build more leaders. And I knew that there were leaders out there trying to rally because every organization said, well, we'll take survivor mentors. Well, that's like the most triggering thing like you can ask a
Yeah,
survivor to
absolutely.
do.
Yes,
Right? But we
absolutely.
need this leadership. We need this in the movement because we have not only our lived experience expertise, but we have our expertise in other areas. So for
Mhm.
me, I'm a forensic psychologist by heart and I'm getting my PhD, and I knew that if this was happening to me at this level of healing, this level of profession, right? And people were still going to use and abuse me for my story, I can't be alone. So Survivor Led Solutions was literally birthed at the same time as my 3-week-old son. And I just ran with it, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I knew that we needed, in this fight, we needed somewhere to rest. So we created these Lead Her retreats. And it's been really great. We had 3 this year, in 2024, in Florida, Wyoming, and in Maui. We took 10 women to each one where they could just
Wow.
rest, be fed,
Yes.
be loved on, because they're actually burning themselves out trying to continue the fight.
Yeah.
Then we saw the need for, this collaborative approach to it where we're empowering each other to keep moving in their own space. And then
Yeah.
out of nowhere, honestly, I mean, obviously it was all planned, but I pursued this thought that the pipeline from human trafficking to prison was almost a straight shot.
Yes.
So a lot of the women that are in this field and in this fight, they have records, right? Or it was during their childhood years, and they needed some extra services because it was expected for them to heal, but there was nobody really trained or qualified to help that reentry program. So we developed one here, and it's going really well. So we have this kind of emerging leadership space, our survivor leaders who are helping navigate the playing field, and then what we're really excited about for 2025 is a certification program for survivors who really do want to use their area of expertise, whether it's their lived experience or, say, legal, education, healthcare,
Hmm.
nursing, whatever it is, and train survivors to continue to build out their credibility so that they're taken seriously and they don't have to be just a charity case for a nonprofit to make money for their organization. Like that seems
Right.
to be where we're pulled, and that's just not where we're useful. We're useful in
Right.
board making decisions. We're useful in leadership platforms. We're useful in legal policy. We're useful in, law enforcement advocacy. So
Right.
why not create a space for that growth and independence?
I absolutely love that. And I can resonate with what you say that our voices as survivors are often suppressed in many ways. You have these really large organizations that are in this fight, but they don't have the survivor voice. So they
Hmm.
really cannot adequately talk about what we've gone through. And I find it frustrating. I'm at an event here in Phoenix right now, and there's a lot of media around. And so I watch these celebrities going from media to media to media, pushing whatever they're talking about. And I am just boots on the ground, just like, here's my card. Let's talk about this. Here's my card. And we have to battle so hard
Hmm.
just to get our message out there about what we're about and how we can make a huge difference. And I agree with you that it's a challenge to not be viewed as a charity case, or,
Hmm.
oh, sometimes I feel like people say, oh, we're tainted in some way. No, we have experience that can really help people and help prevent it from happening to others. So I love what you are doing. You have so many things going on. I don't know how
Hmm.
you do it.
A very strict schedule and a strong support team, that does help.
Right,
I will
right,
say, part of the forensics behind SLS is to say, what's working and what's not working as
right.
an individual, right? And then in your community. And a theme that I'm hearing a lot is I can't get my community to really listen to me, but when I
Hmm.
go speak in another community, it seems like they take it really seriously. So that to me is something that we've got to work on and change. Second, I think what's really powerful is that a lot of survivors, when they get to the space of and true independence, right, where they really want to get out on their own, they want to write a book, they want to start their own organization, they want to do podcasts, they want to do things where that voice can be heard. And
Hmm.
so it helps to have this support structure in place so that they're not doing it on their own. They're not getting re-exploited or victimized because they don't have business degrees sometimes. And
Hmm.
so we're trying to show them, hey, here's a contract, here's public speaking skills, here's the difference between a resume and a curriculum vitae, here's what entrepreneurship really is, right? And here's how you're not going to break the bank trying to do it so you're not desperate. And
Right.
when you get that, that helps heal, right, this independent thing. Then we add that trauma informed care component with the retreats, with the monthly calls, with one on one coaching. And we're finding that it's sometimes it's the only time that this woman has really felt heard about her mission. And so it makes her stronger to go back out into her community and say, now I need you, right? Like I got what I have to make myself successful, but now I need you. And I think that that helps take away that charity case piece because they're
Right.
coming in with this confidence.
Right. Right. So, how many survivors have gone through your program?
Right now, so we're only a year and a half old. We'll be 2 years in July of 2025. And I would say there's 45 survivor leaders in the regular conversation. There's been more, there's been less, but they're emerging. And what's so neat, Sherry, is that it's completely word of mouth. Like we don't do a call for action of, come on, survivors, come talk to us.
Yeah.
It's just the nature and the environment, right, and the atmosphere of which we're trying to share. So every once in a while you get somebody who isn't a good fit because they're still in the life or they have a lot of trauma that they're working through. It's not to
Hmm.
say, I always tell people you can never get kicked out of the program, like you're never going to leave. It's just how much do you want, right? It's
Right.
a volunteer process, and so it might just be that public speaking skill, and then 6 months later they're like, wow, this actually happened recently. This woman, her story is phenomenal, but long story short, and just to be, protect her, she was at her prime too. And then she got this weird feeling that she had it wrong about her childhood sexual abuse and found out that it was a family member that she
Mm.
was actually abused by. And so she took the opportunity, to ask her parents about it. And all of a sudden, she's like, it just infiltrated me, this new layer of unlocked consciousness that I did not know about. and it
Oh,
was
wow.
starting to resonate, her 20s, 30s, 40s. Now she's in her 50s, and she's going, I now understand why my relationships aren't working, right? I'm looking for love in the wrong places. And we've all had that experience. So I'm
Hmm.
like, it's a long-term healing process. And so we need to make sure that long-term support is in place and that it's tappable, right? Like it's reachable, so that it's not just this idea, oh, I have to travel super far to get it. It
Right.
can come to you right here on the computer.
And that's so amazing because people are under the assumption that when a survivor gets rescued, okay, their life is great. Now they can go on and have a really good life. That can happen, but it takes a really long time. And so when I was rescued, there were not a lot of resources. So I
Hmm.
spent a good 20 years just all over the place. And so I love what you have in place because the survivor could come out of, of the life and have some place to land with some guidance,
Hmm.
because you know how it is with the emotions and the confusion and just questioning of ourselves and stuff like that. So I like that.
Yeah,
Certainly not
thanks.
something I could do, but
Well,
I love what you do.
luckily, right, there's 3 degrees in psychology in this brain. But I think the biggest thing is to always remember, like, there is research out there around this phenomena. It's not, there's a lot of research on the need for more, right? There's not a lot of research on the success of this long-term thing, because we really only in the last 10 years have really dug into it. But,
Mm-hmm.
only the last 30 years have we even had a name for it.
Right.
So, right? So there's that. Second is, when you get into what I like to call removal, right? Like, I say to people, like, Jesus isn't hiring. I can't rescue you, right? But you can be removed from a toxic situation, and you can decide whether or not you are going to take that as an opportunity to be rescued from something. But it takes 10 days to, like, acclimate. So there is research about that. So coming out of something that is toxic, or you're in survival mode, you don't know where you're going to eat next, all that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really ask anybody to, like, tell you what their real goals are in the first
Right.
10 days,
No.
because they have no real idea what is real or not, until the fog lifts. And then, so we know you automatically, like, a drop-in day center is vital for a community, because if they have that, there's this ability to go back, right, a few times, like, throughout your healing journey. Then anything less than 90 days is going to be almost too short, because that first 10 days, right, you're not even talking to the real person yet.
Right.
So if they're willing to stay, because you're trauma informed, survivor led, survivor centered, have access to all the things that you really need, right, to stabilize, then they're willing to start doing some sort of recovery. It takes 30 days to build a habit, right? So we know that there's this 40-day window now where we're going to actually
Mm-hmm.
see this person grow. Unfortunately, it can take years before that person truly trusts and is willing to open up. So I imagine, much like addiction, it's going to take 12 or 13 times of going back and messing up before you get that person who's like, and I'm sick of it, right?
Right. Right.
Or they're alive. Because then we also know, once you've been entered into this life, it's 7 to 10 years, and you die by murder, suicide, or overdose. So there's all this stuff around it. So you and I, right, are even in the 1%, where they say 1% will ever truly get out. And only that 1% actually matters after we pass away and we haven't actually gone back. So even that statistic isn't even great, because there's always one trigger that could send me back, right, into a lifestyle, because my brain had been rewired and it's muscle memory that needs to gets retapped into. So
Right.
that's why that long-term care is just so vital. And we need to start really thinking about how we can do that as a community, but as a nation. And then, as women, as men, who really want to see healthy lifestyles. And unfortunately, you burn a lot of bridges along the way to try to get to that place, because people they're not willing to really accept that, right? That
Right.
you should be healed. And you're like, nope. Right? I look different, and I feel different, and I live somewhere different. But at the end of the day, what's in my brain are flashbacks, nightmares, memories, smells,
Right.
triggers, right? All those things. And so It could be any
And
given
that just
moment.
stays with you. It just stays
Yeah.
with you. So you mentioned about like drop-in centers. I'm
Hmm.
curious, is this something that you have where a survivor can come for a day or a couple of hours and just hang out to get loved on?
Oh, wouldn't
Or
that be lovely? That's the dream, Sherry. So I'm hoping
oh,
that,
I'm like, how did you do that? Please tell me. I want to
well,
know.
I
Wow.
can refer you. I saw a beautiful version of it in South Carolina. And I think
Okay.
that they have a good model. Lighthouse for Life is the nonprofit there, and they have the harbor. So it's beautiful. It's set up like a house. There's, regular kitchen, living room, and then instead of bedrooms, they have some offices, but they also have washers and dryers. And so you can meal prep, you can get your clothes done. You can have group, you can have your one-on-ones. And I do think that that is a really great idea. And the fact that it's in such a space like in the middle of the downtown or the community, it gives the people an opportunity to come in and out. You might not advertise that it's human trafficking or sexual assault, but you can work with, women drop-in center. And then what's really great about those opportunities is with our network of having all these other programs, and you have like the Rescue America hotline, you have the human trafficking hotline. So
Hmm.
if you're on those lists of places to call, right, then you have some of those quick tools right then and there for people to grab. I don't know, how to build it, but I believe that it's possible. Right? It takes the right community with the right community
Right.
leaders to do it, and the funding is important. But my motto is like, we just do it anyway. So like, if
Right.
there's dollars,
Right.
great, but if there's not, that's fine. And that's how we started at the jail. Is I spoke to one sheriff and he's like, we don't have a budget for what you're asking, and I was like, it's fine, I'm going to do it anyway. And because
So
I did
what do
it
you?
for free at
Yeah.
one jail, I trained all the officers, and then I went in and I started doing workshops with all the women. And I took this one survivor that I met and asked her, what did you not get while you were incarcerated? And we created her story, which is, and literally that's what's called, her story. And we took it into the jail, this curriculum. And we started with just 1 hour a week. And we started talking to them about attachment theory and ACE scores and
Uh-huh.
um,
Hmm.
different things that were related to the life without being like gruesome about the details, right? Like trauma bond theory, a lot of different things, personality tests. What are your goals? What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? Who are safe people in your life? Do
Right.
you have a password? And we just had these 1 hour conversations with them. And it became the most popular class in the jail, right?
Wow.
Because the women felt like they were actually getting things that they need and that they could take with them. So because one jail got on board, I just presented it to the next jail. And the next jail was like, well, we might have some funding for that. So we built a contract.
Oh, so somehow the money appears, right?
It does. And I think
Ah.
that the important part is like once you get some metrics in, right, you can say how many classes you went to, how many women showed up. People
Hmm.
are like, oh, that seems like a great idea. And like I said, there's a lot of research out there about the need for this restorative justice approach, but
Sure.
there's not a lot of research on the success of it. So that's my heart, is to build that. So a drop-in center would be amazing as a next step once they re-enter from jail, because they can come down and get their things that they need. And even if we can't provide housing, right? Housing is a problem across the globe. There are
Right.
people, in any name it country, and they're struggling with housing. So we can't just say that housing is the answer. It's not. It's what I call qualified case management, right?
Right.
You got survivors on that case management team that are kind of in these leadership positions. You got these
Right.
trained social workers that really understand the dynamic here. And then you've got law enforcement's buy-in. Okay, that's how I think about this. So we
Okay.
trained all of the officers. We started doing the services with the women. Then I said, hey, correctional officers, I also kind of noticed that you're really burnt out and have a lot of compassion fatigue. You're tired. Yes, yes, we are. We need this stuff just like, what you're offering the inmates.
Oh
So
yeah.
we did our first, so exciting, correctional officer retreat this past December. And we did everything we do with the
Yay.
women, right? We took them to a horse ranch. They got equine, they got groups, they did Bible study, they got fed, they got massages, they got Mary Kay satin hands, right? We loved on them. And what
Oh,
was
that's
so
amazing.
great was we got a quote back from one of the correctional officers that said, I actually learned some daily routines to help my mental capacity so I can be a better person at work, and I use them every day. So if you can make that impact here, then what it does, this is really exciting, right? We're talking about Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Law enforcement and survivors do not get along on a very overarching basis because of just the lack of real education. And so this is a way that we get it, right? So once we start loving on the officers and we're loving on the women, I can say, hey, let's bridge that gap. And what was so cool was that an officer called just a few weeks later after that retreat and said, hey, I remember the training you gave, and we found this lady, and we don't want to arrest her. Can you help take her to a safe place to go? So part of the reentry is for us to then also start showing up at the homeless shelters, at the addiction recovery centers, at the domestic violence shelters, and do workshops there. So we're building trust and rapport all the way through this process. So I'm going to say, quote me now, whatever, but I think it's going to reduce recidivism. I think that it's actually going to bring not 12 and 13 mistakes, but maybe 7 or 8, 9 or 10.
Right.
Just a little bit less, because they know. And we did have one girl mess up and use drugs after she got out. But the best part is that she didn't give up on herself, and she called and she said, hey, I messed up. I need help. I don't want to go back to jail. What should I do? And so we had to have that, like, all right, let's look at your life and look at the trends of which you have been in, and why does your brain think that that's okay? And so just watching her have these self-discovery, moments of truth, it's like the most rewarding thing you can do. So I love what we're doing.
Up on themselves. They've gotten to a point like, okay, this is my life, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess
You're
I
right.
might as well do this, that, or the other thing, because this is my life and it's not going to change because nobody cares.
Right.
And
And that is the instant response, you know? Um, and when you see the women in jail and, they're arrested on loitering charges, they're arrested on trespassing. And and this one woman they found her right outside a dumpster, and they were just like, you had showed us the signs. She says, there's nothing anybody can do for me. And I'm like, no, we're going to go do something, right? And the least I can do is take her to go get something to eat, go get a shower, get a change of clothes, right? Make some phone calls and see what happens next. And, she's hung on. Come to find out, she's got several broken bones and dislocated vertebrae. So she's getting that, but we got her into the ER, and it was like, I know that people don't want to hear well, I could never do that. You must be such a good person. And I'm like, but I think about it as if it's my child,
I
right?
get that. Right.
And that's where you got to go with it, and not be disgusted by the world, but go, all right, I'm called to serve. Now, how do I do that and do it well? Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, that's just pieces of it.
You have a lot of pieces of a lot of stuff that you're doing, but yet it all flows really well. And I love what you're doing. You are making a huge impact, and then you're also involved in legislation.
Yes, because why not? So we have this opportunity now, and it's really been a great thing. I have to give the credit to Ann Basham. She has Ascent Council or Consulting in DC, and she saw the need too. She worked, I think, with Polaris first, and she said, hey, we're writing these bills, we're writing all this stuff, but we don't really have a lot of the voice there. And so she started putting together the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Roundtable. And Sherry, to be really honest, I can't even tell you when I got invited. I don't even remember how. The invitation just showed up in my email, and I was like, is this even real? And it was
you want me to go to DC? Okay.
right. And I'm like, what does that mean? So I actually called and was like, hey, got this, kind of excited, don't know what it is, would like to vet this real quick,
Right.
and they said, yeah, this is what we're doing. You get to sit right at this table and ask questions about the legislation that's on the docket for the Senate or the House, depending on where they're at in the process. And I took the first opportunity to just go and observe. Now, I like to think that I can just sit in the back and pay attention, and that's it, take notes. But as soon as I heard this like strike of a chord, this doesn't sound right. Like I don't think it'd be applicable to me in the mission that I'm doing. So I want to ask a question. So, I boldly turned my microphone on and then ask this question as it pertained to like, how are you going to do that?
Right,
And
right.
um, and it led me into a spiral of, hey, there's a lot of need for survivor input on bills. Whether it is about debt bondage or whether it's about expungement and vacatur, or are we going to recognize survivor anything? I mean,
Right,
anything, right? Like it can be about anything.
right.
So what's really great is that that happens twice a year, and they do, and I know that you've been there. So they open it up to organizations, that are willing to show up and be a part of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice when you get to talk to some of the senators and hear, their opinions and how hard they're actually working on this, and the
Right,
teams that they're willing to put together to make this stuff happen. Um,
right.
can we control all of it? No. Is our influence worth it? I think it's like anything else. You get in what you, or you get out of it what you put into it. And
Right.
once these advisory councils started to become a thing, now it's really cool. I'm watching this happen naturally with the
Mm-hmm.
survivors under SLS's collaboration. Is I said, hey, you have one in California, you have one in South Carolina, you have one in Texas. Like, who's hosting that call? Because
Yes.
wouldn't that be great, right? And then
Yes.
even like, Tim Tebow was there the last time we were there, and he talked about his mission of renewed hope of 2024. And he mentions these lived experience experts to help with the need for more analysts to go look for these missing children. And my call to him, literally with his team, was like, so how are you going to vet those survivor lived
Right,
experiences?
right, right, right. Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's important that you pull from a healthy group of people. So that certification program that we're talking about is just like for that exact example. You've got state legislature who wants to make a difference, but they don't really, they're pulling from whoever's in their local field of influence, but there might be a more qualified person. They just don't know
Right.
who that person is. So yeah, we got the legislation piece going. It's really exciting. I'm really just a networker in that space. I don't know if my brain is fully political, because I have a lot of my own apprehensions.
That's
But
where I found that I like that.
yeah, I
That's
want
where
to,
I feel I can make a difference. So I mean, I got our vacature law updated last session, so
right?
that
I
was
mean, it's so cool.
that was
It's just so cool
it
because
is.
we can have a play in that, and our signatures matter. That's a piece
Yes.
that's really important too, is watching that collection. Like I can send a mass email out to, these survivor-led solutions contact people, and then all of a sudden you watch these go from 50 to 150, and you're like, whoa,
Right.
like
Right.
that was impressive.
And
So
it gives other survivors that maybe have just recently been rescued from the life where they've walked out, just the fact that they can go on and have a very successful life
mhm,
in however they vision it to be.
right,
That it's not, and that it takes work to get. I
yes,
mean, I've been out for a really long time, but it took me, like I said, a good 20 years of falling down, getting back up, falling
hmm,
down, getting back up. So it's not easy, but you know, survivors' voices really do matter, and I'm
yeah,
grateful that organizations and lawmakers are starting to pay attention to that. That we do have a lot of insight, and I like that you're bringing so many of the survivors together with your leadership program, and then now
hmm,
this additional training to help them have the certification if that's what an organization is needing, to just say, okay, we'll listen to you now because you have this certification. It's good.
yeah. We want it to be universal. What's cool about some of these calls is watching like Canada pop in and Jamaica pop in, and they're going, what's going on over here and how are you guys doing that? And then going back to their space and community, I'm like, you can just see the ripple effect of what could happen. And again, not treat it like a charity case and like to feel
Right.
bad for it, because there are cultures in which it is very normal. The sex work industry is so normal and so
Mm-hmm.
ingrained, that it would be hard for a woman to stand up and speak out against it, right? And not be exiled out of her community. But when you
Yes.
say she's here and she's backed by all these other ones, right? And
Right.
the army is there and the army is showing up, that gives them a lot more strength and courage to want to see something different for themselves and for their future.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's probably even more challenging for an individual who society has normalized that,
Hmm.
to realize that that's not actually normal. So that's, I wonder if sometimes, I'm sure you've experienced that working with survivors. Like,
Hmm.
gosh, is it like double trauma in some ways because now they feel guilty because
Yeah.
this is what they were expected to do.
Yeah,
So,
and I mean, and again, generationally. So there is like a whole culture of that in the United States. Where I live, familial sex trafficking is the highest type of trafficking. And you're talking about grandmas doing it to moms, that's doing it to daughters, that's doing it to daughters or sons.
yeah,
And
it's just the
we
way.
have to always come at it with this kind of curiosity, like, and why do you think that's the way it is? Are you limited to thinking that's all it is? Because if you chose a different route, what would happen? And will that
Right,
really happen? You know?
right.
Or is it because you're staying there that it's going to happen? Because there's a whole world, right, of place, and there's communities where then you got the other side. This never happens here. We've heard that so
Right.
many times
Oh,
in our life.
right.
This doesn't happen here. And you're like, why do you think that? Because you haven't seen it? Because you're not trained? And even
Mhm.
it's wild to me that even in the last 30 years, even though we have legislation, even though we have education, we have terrible movies that have showed us what this is, we have great documentaries that show us what it really is. And you go to a national conference and you ask 150 to 400 people who in here can describe human trafficking, and like less than a handful raise their hand.
Right. Well,
And
they
so,
can say what it says in a book, but they
right.
can't describe what it really, yeah.
And so that's why this survivor voice is so important, is because we are changing the narrative. It is not what you are taught, right? That was a distraction. We
Right.
want to make sure you can speak out and when you see it. And then my heart, and I'll tell you a quick story, again, with this familial piece, is
Uh-huh.
when the child or the victim comes forward, right? And we victim shame, we victim blame. What was she wearing? Why did she do that? Why was she there? Didn't she know better? That was mine when I got told all the time. I should have known better. And then the child says it to their parent. Hey, this is happening to me, and this other family member is doing it. And the parent, disgusted and like wants to help save their child from harm, but it doesn't really have the confidence to go do the report. And so what we're seeing here is a lot of just brush it under the rug, right? And it'll be fine as long as, you weren't actually hurt. I don't know what that really means, you know, but as long
Right.
as you weren't dying and didn't need to go to the hospital, you didn't get pregnant or you didn't bleed, right?
Right.
Like they're
You're
forgetting that
okay.
psychological warfare. Yeah.
Right.
And so this daughter told their dad that it had happened at a grandparent's house. And the dad, eventually, and I hate to say it, but he was sort of forced to come tell me by the family member because I am our spokesperson on human trafficking. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he and I meet, and I said, you can do what you want. In our state, you're a mandated reporter because you told me I actually have to tell. So here's what I think we should do. We can do it anonymously. We can do it together, right? But I want you to envision yourself 5, 10 years from now. Maybe your daughter is married and her husband is now the brunt of her psychosis stuff that happens, right? Because it comes out later. She gets triggered again, something happens, doesn't matter. Could be in the family, could be third party, could be a nightmare. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to be remembered as the father who did nothing or the father who actually gave a crap and did something, right? She might be mad at you now. There is going to be, retaliation, and there's going to be some backlash,
Right.
but you're doing the right thing, and that will be honored later. And so we did it. We filed it anonymously together, right? The dad left like you could just see the burden sort of falling off his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And within a week, our state department, child welfare system came out, did some interviews, and found out that grandfather had been touching all of the cousins, not just her.
Oh my
So
goodness.
even though he was a well-esteemed member of the community and had a business and everybody liked him and, all these
Mhm.
things, that's exactly, we're trying to break that narrative. It's not the boogeyman hiding under the stairs somewhere. It is like somebody and it has to be
Right.
addressed.
Right,
So,
because that
yeah.
relationship is established. So many people think, thanks to the movies, that it's a kidnapping. Usually, the
Hmm.
child is walking home from school. Yes, that does happen, but that's a small percent when it
Correct,
goes.
right. That is somebody's story, but that's not the majority story.
I
And not
know.
not in America, right? And that's the other piece. It's like you have to think about your cultural space.
Right,
So ethnicity plays a huge piece into this. It's not that one is more vulnerable than the other. It can be, but you got your same color on color crime. Like
mhm,
that's not the problem. It's the vulnerabilities that are at hand. So this could be just because you're under 18, right? This could be because of you do have only one parent at home, or you have lots of brothers and sisters, or you live in a neighborhood that doesn't get a lot of resources and access to them. But it also could just be because you were born into a family that this is normal. You know, so that vulnerability right there is nothing you did, or
right,
could even be in control of. So recognizing those things and getting the buy-in from law enforcement and getting the buy-in from families to tell, even if it is their family member, and say, hey, now that we have this, we can't do that part though without filling that with resources, that drop-in center, that
right,
education, that survivor leader in
right,
your community, to help you navigate those therapists that need to be trained, right? The lawyers that need
right,
to be trained,
right.
so that we can actually activate a system. So,
I don't know about in your area, but one thing that we're working on is this missing gap between, so a child can get picked up from trafficking and there's nowhere to take them just in the interim while insurance gets taken care of, or government insurance has got to get approved, so you end up in mental health facilities, and then that's where we step in and we have to battle with the mental health facility to get that minor out. So we're
hmm,
working on a safe house to be that interim place to go until the insurance gets done, because I've gotten to the point where this last time it happened, I told them I will take them to the media, because I know that all they're doing is keeping that child there until they run out all of the benefits. And
hmm,
then they will let them go, but then there's no other benefit left for the child to go to the proper place for care.
right.
So
And
not
that
all
is
of them.
interesting.
Yeah, so this is a big problem we're having in our area, and so
I
we're
think
trying to
that's why I got excited about the incarcerated survivor, because our system is like, if law enforcement identifies, they Baker Act them, take them into the mental health facility, right?
hmm
Or they put them in jail. Like, that's the
yeah, and where
choice.
are they going to go?
So when this officer recently called me and was like, hey, I remembered your training. I mean, yes, she needed to go seek medical attention, but we wouldn't have even known that until we got her stable and sober. And that took 2 days,
Right,
because she wasn't complaining of anything hurting and there wasn't anything hanging off her broken or bleeding, right? So we wouldn't have known dislocated shoulders and bones. We just knew she was in some pain because she'd been drunk, but once she sobered up, she didn't need to go to a mental institution yet. She didn't need to go into jail. She needed to go to the hospital,
right,
right? And we wouldn't have known that unless we could stabilize her first. So that safe house that you're talking about, that interim space, that's why I'm like so adamant. Get as many of those spaces as you can. They don't have to
that's
be
what we
just
need.
safe houses, right? They can be anything as long as they're willing to take the person for a few days and help us buy some time, right?
Right,
That's kind of the idea.
our experience is the government red tape that's making it very difficult.
Got it.
At least at our local level here, we're having some challenges with that, because we have people that would say, I would be, almost like a foster care program. Like, I would be happy to take a survivor to just hang out at my house for 2 weeks, understanding that they may run, but they won't allow that to happen in our state. So
Yeah. Hmm.
got some
Our
things to
state's a
work
little
on.
different too. I don't know what you're, and I know this is a whole nother conversation, but you mentioned that. So one thing that we have at the state level that is very interesting is our undocumented children. And
Right.
our governor made a law that law enforcement is to place that child, not our state social workers. And so that's
Okay.
building that same rift. right? Like law enforcement aren't trained social workers. They're looking for
Right.
the bad guy. So if you give them quote unquote bad guy that's a
Mm-hmm.
child that can't speak English,
Yeah.
what is their plan? They're just trying to get them off their hands, right? And so they're placing them in really inappropriate places too. And it's
Right.
not law enforcement's fault. It's just like this is the problem of the law that was created that needs to be readdressed, and it hasn't. It's got to take time. We got to bring it back up in front of the state committee and the state house and go, wait, this I see your band-aid, but let's actually do some surgery here, right? This wasn't a good idea. It's actually causing more harm. And there's known, traffickers that are down waiting for these kids to just be handed to them. And that, yeah,
Absolutely.
I know there's so much work to do. And I don't think any one organization is going to fix it. And I don't think,
No.
I don't even know if we're going to see the long fruits in our lifetime, of that
Absolutely.
remedy. But I know that if we don't do it now, right, if we don't get even louder and unite
Right.
even stronger, then it's going to take
Mhm.
even longer for that fruit to fall.
Right. I agree. I agree. And I appreciate you so much and all that you do. We're going to have to wrap up here, but
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And is there anything that you would like to share in closing?
Well, I'm not sure when people will hear this, but I will tell you that we're having our annual Because I Wore This event for Survivor Led Solutions on January 30th. And it's an opportunity for survivors around the nation to actually get involved. They can send a headshot and a quote on what they want to be when they grow up. That we'll be promoting the month of January and then a little bit afterward. And it's really just to highlight the work that you're doing already, right? So the what you want to be when you grow up could be exactly what you're doing now, right? You're working as the pearl at the mailbox, director, or it could be that you want to be a stay-at-home mom. You know, the idea is to stop shaming and victim blaming and see the potential
Absolutely.
that a survivor can become.
And we're always growing up, right? Every day we're
Yes,
growing
we're
up.
always
So,
learning, right?
and I'll have your information included in the
Sure.
podcast so people can reach out to you directly. But Alicia, again, thank you so much for your time, and I am so grateful that I met you, and so proud of all of the work that you're doing. And I have no doubt you're impacting people in many, many ways. So
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Sherry. Thanks for
much.
having me. Yep.
Uh,
Thank you. Have a good day.
you too.